friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Megan here, and today we're going over all of the books that I read during my brain surgery recovery. I ended up reading around 20-ish, I want to say, and admittedly a lot of them were rereads, but I just went through a really traumatic surgery and I wanted to just like ease back into reading with some comfort books, so I think we're okay. I think it's okay that I reread some books, and honestly I needed to reread a lot of these because I am planning to read the final installation of these books and or a sequel, so I just wanted to refresh my memory on what was happening in these books and what was going on. That way when I got to the sequel or the final book in the series, then I would understand what was happening. This reread was actually because the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie was coming out, so in honor of that I reread the entire Hunger Games trilogy as well as the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And then I also read The World of the Hunger Games, which is a movie companion for movie number 1, and I thoroughly enjoyed this experience. I love the Hunger Games world and series. It is the books that got me into reading in the first place, like super. I've always been somewhat of a reader, but the Hunger Games is the first like core memory books in middle school that like really got me into fandoms and being part of a group of readers necessarily. So I just have a soft spot in my heart for this series and I love it so much. A lot of people have that with Harry Potter or Twilight. For me it was the Hunger Games. So I was that definitely like 2010s dystopian book reader, so that is where my heart lies, and I love that series so much. I'm so happy I reread it. I did a lot of Net Galley reading, so we'll get through those really quickly before I get into the other physical books, because I had so many books on my Net Galley. I think I had about 18. So I read 8 while I was in recovery. I have 10 left. So almost half, which is pretty good. We'll start with The Beginning of Everything. This is a book following a young woman. Actually, I think she's more middle-aged if I remember correctly, but her name is Jess and she has been in an abusive relationship, so she is running from that, and so she is essentially homeless, and so she's trying to start over, and she ends up squatting in some guy's house, and when he discovers that she's there, he kind of offers his home to her. And honestly, overall this book was just not for me. I ended up giving it like 2.5 stars, I think. I wasn't convinced. I didn't believe it. I wasn't a fan of how everything played out, but I just find it hard to believe that you would find someone living in your home and allow them to stay there and fall in love with them, and alternatively someone finding out that you live in their home and being comfortable enough to stay there. I don't know. The whole situation was just weird, and I think that the topics that were discussed in the book were definitely important and definitely needed to be talked about, like homelessness and poverty and abusive relationships and all of that nature of things, but the actual romance itself just did not feel fully fleshed out. And honestly, the character, the man whose house it is, Gethin, he says he did it because of his brother, but we never really learn more. I mean, his brother was homeless, but I wish we had gotten more of a fleshed out situation or storyline of him and his brother, so we truly understood what his heart was saying and like why he was so okay with this. And honestly, it just kind of felt like Stockholm Syndrome-esque, but it was just not for me. But it is what it is. Not every book is gonna be for me. Next was Fancy Meeting You Here. This is kind of that trope of always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Our main character is going to be a bridesmaid in all of her friends' weddings. I think there's 3 friends who are having a wedding, but not only is she the bridesmaid for all of her friends, she is also the florist for all of her friends. She has her own flower shop and she's trying to have this blooming business. Get the joke. But yeah, Elise is our main character. She's just trying to build this flower shop and build her business, and it's almost like a burnout situation. She is just stretching herself too thin and it's just not going well for her. But she enlists the help of a caterer who ends up being the little brother of one of the friends that got married. And through the course of like somewhat of a bantery enemies to lovers situation, they fall for each other. But there's also like a political thing happening, and obviously the like sister to the guy is a little weirded out that her friend is dating her brother. So there's just a lot of subplots going on. It's a fun little read, almost 27 Dresses-esque, and I enjoyed it. Next we had What the River Knows, and this is by Isabel Ibanez, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong there, but this is a young adult fantasy, almost new adult-ish, in which our main character is Inez, and Inez has spent her whole life in luxury, but all she ever wants was her parents to care for her and be there for her and to be close with her parents. However, they keep going off on these trips to Egypt, and she starts to wonder like what is so good about Egypt that they would be willing to not be there for their own daughter. And one day she receives a letter in the mail from her uncle stating that her parents went off on this journey and have not come back, so it's presumed that they are in fact dead. So she is given the full inheritance and she sets off to Egypt to figure out what was so great about Egypt anyways. And when she's in Egypt, she kind of gets sucked into this heist of sorts, and there's magic involved of like Cleopatra giving magic, and there's like Egyptian history involved, and like heisty Indiana Jones-esque like archaeological heisting. So it is a really fun little story if you enjoy like Night at the Museum or Indiana Jones, or even like the movie Jungle Cruise with The Rock and Emily Blunt in it. That's another good like kind of example of this world, I guess you could say. My favorite part was definitely like the setting and the magic and everything happening within Egypt, and I had a lot of fun with it. I don't think it intrigued me quite enough to want to pick up the second book, and I honestly thought it was going to be a standalone, so I was a little surprised when it led to like a cliffhanger for a second book, but I did enjoy it while it lasted. Next was Wild Things, and this is also one that I wasn't quite sure was for me, and this is a female-female romance in which our main character Elle feels like her life is in a rut, and she's just kind of living this monotonous day-to-day, like her job's the same, her relationships are the same, everything's the same, and she's just like over it until her friends come up with the idea to house share, and they move to the countryside to this little cottage, and it does have this cottagecore, cottage living-esque vibe to it, which I really enjoyed. I love the whole scenario with the chickens. If you've read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. However, what this book is pitched as, which is a romance, I don't really think it fits that narrative. There is a little bit of romance to it, but one, it doesn't come in until like the very end, so it's more of a subplot than an actual romance book. And two, I really didn't like the romance. Honestly, I thought she was going to end up with someone completely else, and honestly I wish she did. It made more sense, it was more fleshed out there, and there was more chemistry there than who she ended up with. She's essentially in love with her best friend. There's unrequited love and forced proximity, but it just didn't work for me. It felt more like I read this review on Goodreads. I wish I knew who said it. Maybe I'll put it here, but they essentially said it feels more like when you have an annoying little sibling that won't go away than a romance. And that's exactly how it feels. So just wasn't a fan of the romance. She should have ended up with the bartender, but that's just me. And yeah, that is Wild Things. Then we have, this is actually not a Net Galley, but the Net Galley was a sequel, or the sequel was a Net Galley, vice versa there. But For the Love of the Bard starts this small town series book where our main character is an author and she goes back to her small town for the summer to participate in the Shakespeare Festival, and this is like a huge thing that this place has every year, and she gets sucked into being the director of Twelfth Night, and she is partnered with her ex who broke her heart on prom night. And it gets into like everything that happened, but it is like, whoa, that is kind of sucky that you did that, my dude. And I've never been a huge fan of second chance romance, but honestly, like Miranda and Adam deserved that second chance, and I love this book. I love them. I love the theater trope. I love the author trope. I love the small town trope. This book had pretty much everything going for it, and it worked beautifully. And then the sequel was my Net Galley, which is The Bane of My Existence, a continuation into the next summer of Bard's Rest, which is the small town, and we are following our previous main character's older sister. Her name is Portia, and she is a lawyer. She's very well put together and reserved, and not quite as vibrant as our first main character, Miranda. But she is so fun in her own regard, and I loved learning her backstory and more about her. She is pit against this, I forget if he's a contractor or a realtor or something, but he's coming in with this agency and he wants to buy land and build condos. And this small town is not having it. So it's lawyer versus realtor contractor guy, and it was so fun. I loved their romance as well. And honestly, this just small town is so beautiful, and I hope that there are more books in this series, but it doesn't appear that any more are on the horizon, so that's really sad. But I really hope that this author writes more books in the series, because there's still another sister, and there's a best friend of Portia who is from this small town. That there's just so many directions and stories I think that could be written about these characters, and I want more. I love them. I love them all so much. If you enjoyed the Well Met series by Jen DeLuca, you would really enjoy this one as well. And then we have Thieves Gambit. This is such a fun action adventure YA series. I did not know it was going to be a series, so I was pleasantly surprised when it ended on a cliffhanger to lead to a second book, because I just wanted more. It is not dystopian, but it gives dystopian vibes. It's basically if you took like, is it Ocean's 8 or Ocean's 11? I always get those two confused, but the one with the heist. Ocean's 8 and Squid Games. It's not necessarily a fight to the death, or if you don't win the games you'll die, but there are like very dangerous quests, and if you die then it happens, and they don't really care. So a lot of fun. And I also loved the subplots of like her mom. Oh, I never even gave the initial plot. Let me rewind there for a second. So our main character has this dream, I think, of being a gymnast and going to a gymnastics school or something like that. I forget what her original dream was. But when she is trying to pursue that dream, she has to lie to her mother, and this causes her mother to get kidnapped, and so she is forced to join the Thieves Gambit, which is a huge competition, and the winner will receive a wish. So she plans to use this wish to save her mother. Our main character, Ross, I believe her name was, Ross has always been told her whole life not to trust anyone, and to not ally with anyone, to not befriend anyone other than her family, like her close-knit family. I think really truly only her mother and perhaps her aunt is who she's supposed to trust. So she's very reserved and very guarded against any type of relationship. But honestly, seeing her open her heart and learn to trust and ally with others was such an endearing thing, and I loved basically every relationship she cultivated in this book. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this book, and I have it on my Christmas wish list, and I'm very excited to read the next installment in the series. The Good Part. This is following Lucy, who again, that kind of like stuck in a rut, stuck in a monotonous version of her life, and she just wants to skip to the good part. So it's very 13 going on 30, big 17 again. She finds a wishing machine and then she wakes up in her future life. And I loved this one. I love all those aforementioned movies, so I really enjoyed this book and like her learning about her future self. But I also, as much as I wanted to see her in her future at the end of the book, I really appreciate how it ended, and like she's not necessarily going to have that future. She is going to have to make choices to get there, and life is all about choices and like different things happening. So fate may be a thing, but it can always adjust per se. So I really did appreciate how it ended, as bittersweet as it was. And then the final digital book I read was Set on You, which is the first book in a series to a book I have already read, which is X's and O's by Amy Leah. And I loved X's and O's, and I wanted to learn more about the first couple because obviously we know who gets together because they're mentioned in the second book. So I wanted to see how the first couple got together. And in this we were following Crystal, who is a plus size fitness model, social media influencer. Oh my gosh, there we go, we got there. She's a plus size influence fitness person, and she cultivates this enemies to, well, at the time it's just enemies situation with a firefighter who's going at this gym, and they're in this just back and forth banter, bickering situation until one day they eventually like talk and then fall in love. And I just loved it. He's a firefighter. I think my main gripes with it were he was just kind of a jerk from the get-go with no real reason. And even when we got his point of view, it was basically like, I thought you were pretty, so I was a jerk. And I'm just not a huge fan of the trope of like, let's be a jerk because I like you. Like, I don't think that gets you anywhere, to be honest. So that wasn't my favorite, but I did like their banter and their relationship. And then the other thing I didn't like was the way that they became friends is because their grandparents are getting married. So it felt slightly incestual, because they're like married family in a way. So that's its own issue, but overall it was a really cute, lighthearted, fun read. Alright, those are all the digital books I read. And then I already talked about the Hunger Games, but I also finished the Furyborn trilogy by finally finishing Lightbringer. This was a fantastic end to such a like thrilling, magic-packed adventure trilogy, I guess you could say, and I had a lot of fun with it. I think the biggest thing that kept me guessing the whole time was Simon, and I was always guessing straight up till the end where he stood, and I think that is impeccable writing when I can't see where something's going. Like, I like to be shocked, so that was a lot of fun. I also reread Shadow and Bone, but I realized I'd never read Demon in the Wood yet, so I finished this one. This is a backstory of the Darkling from Shadow and Bone. Reread Shadow and Bone, loved both of these, love the Grishaverse. I'm reading this because I have not read Rule of Wolves yet, and as the final installation, I guess you could say, of the Grishaverse, so gotta do that. I reread Fourth Wing because of course I want to read good old Iron Flame here. Gotta get to that soon. And I also read Shipped and The Spanish Love Deception, which are two very different books but have somewhat similar kind of plot lines. They are both office romances. They're both enemies to lovers. This one's fake dating and this one's more of a like competition, I guess you could say. But I thoroughly enjoyed both of these. Spanish Love Deception, I totally understand why everyone hypes this up and like raves about it. I'm right there with you guys. Loved it. Love Aaron in this. It's a good book. I mean, it had everything going for it with like the travel and the fake dating and the enemies to lovers and everything. Then shipped here, we are following two people who are up for the same promotion, and their competition or project per se is to go on a cruise and come up with a marketing campaign for the company, and whoever has a better pitch will get the promotion. So it's enemies to lovers in that regard. It also has the vacation aspect, which I really enjoyed. But what's also interesting about this one is it has a subplot. All of this one did too, of discrimination in the workplace, and they both handled it very differently, but I really enjoyed dealings, I guess you could say. So I loved both of those, and that is where we stand. Oh, I also got to read an advanced reader copy of Ghostsmith. I'll get into further details on this later. I want it to have its own video, but just know that I read the sequel to Bonesmith and it is beautiful. That is my recovery wrap up. Let me know what you guys have been up to or been reading these past few months, and I'll check you in my next video. Bye friends.